There is a question this platform returns to in different forms with every guest in every conversation. What is art actually for? Today's guest has answered it under conditions that most of us never will. Abed Al Kadiri is a Lebanese artist whose practice was forged in Beirut, a city that has experienced civil war, revolution, economic collapse, and one of the largest explosions in recorded history. His paintings translate violence, not document it, not illustrate it, but translate it. His work is held in the collections of the British Museum, the Institut du Monde Arabe, the World Bank, the Barjeel Foundation, and the Sursat Museum. He built one of the leading nonprofit contemporary arts institutions in the Middle East and has curated the work of many emerging artists from the region. And this year, he has begun running art workshops for displaced children in villages in southern Lebanon while airstrikes happen just outside their walls. His Al Makama series was made in response to the destruction of the Mosul Museum. Ashes to the Sea documents the mass drownings of migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Today, I Would Like to Be a Tree was painted on the wounded walls of the gallery damaged by the Beirut port blast. 80 panels made in the immediate aftermath of one of the worst days in Lebanon's history. These are not responses to crisis. They are infrastructure for surviving and overcoming it. Abed, welcome to the Art of Impact.
Hello, Christopher. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's an honor to have you here with us. I do want to start where all this began, not with the work per se, but with the place that made you you. You grew up in Beirut, double majored in Arabic literature and fine arts, went on to a master's in painting. That's a fusion of many creative disciplines, right? And I think it tells us something important about how you think and who you are. So how did growing up in Beirut shape you as a person and as an artist?
Well, I always write in my biography that I was born in Beirut, not in Lebanon, to make it more specific. For me, Beirut is really a multi-layered city of histories, a city that shaped the way I understand crisis and stability, and for sure, survival. Living in Beirut taught us, not only me, how to adapt quickly, to endure all these contradictions like construction, reconstruction, presence and absence, and moving forward despite harsh circumstances.
So I know you had spent some time also in Kuwait building cultural institutions there from the ground up. I'm curious to hear about what your experience was like there and ultimately, what called you back to Lebanon.
Well, I left Beirut in 2006 during the Israeli war on Lebanon. Like many Lebanese of my generation, the war profoundly shaped my life and forced me to seek opportunities elsewhere. And Kuwait became my home for nearly a decade, and a place where I developed professionally as a writer and curator, and I found myself advocating for critical discussions around contemporary art within this cultural landscape. After 9 years curating exhibitions, leading a nonprofit organization, I learned that cultural institutions are not simply building or exhibition spaces. They are ecosystems that build through trust, relationships, and vision and long-term commitment. Those experiences taught me how to build projects from the ground up and how culture can create meaningful connections between artists and audiences.
So there you learned that the arts, there's this infrastructure behind it and how you build community perhaps around that infrastructure. You spent 9-10 years in Kuwait and then you returned to Beirut in 2016. Is that correct?
Yes, I left Kuwait because I increasingly felt the environment was becoming more restrictive, especially for expats. And despite my deep investment in the country cultural scene, there was a growing sense that no matter how much one contributed, there's always limit. And as a human being and as an artist, this sense of belonging was very important for me. So I left. I moved to London for a period, but I decided to return to Beirut in 2015. Back then, I really had a strong feeling and strong need to focus on my own work as an artist, not as a curator or, a gallery manager or a director for a nonprofit organization.
So in many ways, you were looking for a sense of belonging, a sense of home, a return to who you are as an artist when you went back to Lebanon. I want to understand alongside our listeners the underlying philosophy of your practice. because you use a very specific word to describe what you do with quote unquote violence. You say you translate it.
Well, when I say I translate violence, it has different meaning. First, why I always highlight violence as a major title or like a focus in my practice, because violence has been a constant presence throughout much of my life. Of course, the histories and landscapes that surrounded us as Lebanese. So growing up in Lebanon, it became impossible to separate personal memory from larger histories of war and destruction and of sure displacement. So when I speak about translating violence, I do not mean representing it literally. Rather, I'm interested in transforming the emotional and psychological and probably the human consequences into another language. For example, using charcoal, probably in the last 15 years in my life, is one of the ways I see translating violence, because charcoal is a material or medium that went into a very destructive and violent process. And also the gestures in my work itself, my relationship with the physicality of my space and my studio, these are all ways to understand, the impact of the violence on my life, and then projecting them into the artwork itself.
Right. So you're in many ways trying to process and integrate something which had been a constant element in your life. And like you had said, for all Lebanese people, you were in Beirut during the October 2019 revolution, on the streets every day, and you were keeping a visual diary from photographs taken on your phone. Then in August 2020, the port had exploded, one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in recorded history in a city already that was in economic collapse. You said you struggled after the blast to imagine a place for art. You couldn't see how it could help when at that time there was really no hope. I want to ask you, have you found hope again now in Lebanon?
Hope is not a word that I would use. From the revolution to the port explosion to the war that continues to shape our region, I think the most important thing is to believe in the ability of art to create moments of connection and solidarity.
True. Your response to the port explosion produced Today I Would Like to Be a Tree, which again is an 80-panel mural painted on the walls of the Gallery Tanit, which had itself been damaged by the blast, correct?
Yes.
So that was a very specific choice of yours to make. Can you walk us through what did it mean to make something that large and that quickly in that space?
The decision was deeply connected to the wounded building itself, because, Gallery Tanit and where my exhibition had been on view, the explosion happened and 5 people were killed in the same building, including our friend and architect Jean-Marc Bonfils. To process this major traumatic event and to try to heal, by creating this mural, and also to invite an NGO that was repairing the windows and doors of affected or destroyed apartments around the gallery neighborhood. And the idea for me resonated incredibly with how I felt and what I wanted really to offer and how I want to support. So over 2 months, as people were repairing their homes, I was painting trees across the wounded building. I had a dream actually 2 days after the explosion, and I saw the whole gallery filled with trees. I took it really as a sign or as a call to stand and to act and support these people who lost their homes, who lost their lives. And we managed to raise a big fund and to repair 50 apartments around the gallery.
I'd say one thing that would be a through line throughout your career is this desire to do something constructive with your creativity. What I next want to speak with you about, which is your work that you're doing today with hundreds of children in Lebanon. You had told me that now you're working with 26 schools and have reached approximately 700 children, mostly from villages in the south that had been devastated by recent airstrikes. Could you walk me through where the idea for these workshops came from and what they actually look like in practice and what you've seen happen with the kids who are participating?
The process itself is quite simple. I would like to say it's built first on love and human connection. So we began by talking about dreams, First, I introduce myself, I introduce the artist and the human, and then I talk about my dream to become an artist and how I managed to accomplish this dream. And then we talk about tools of expression, that in this case, art is the most powerful tool for expression: drawing, writing, acting, dancing. And then I talk about birds. I always take with me around 16 photos, like photo cards of birds. Here I try to create kind of a different narrative than the narrative of displacement and war. They become these birds. They fly, they explore different landscapes. This usually is the most interesting part before we start drawing. I shift their attention from the violent realities they are going through. And, we travel somehow in imagination and with colorful images of these birds. So then we go to stamping. So I give every child a white paper bag and stamps, colorful stamps, birds, flowers, colorful patterns. And I ask them to start stamping their paper bags. And then the moment of magic, because, when I entered the school, many of these children arrived highly disoriented, restless, emotionally overwhelmed. And when the roll paper begins to unfold, something shifts. The atmosphere changes completely. I think what continues to amaze me is the children's ability to dream despite everything they have experienced. And then, I see them creating worlds larger than the realities imposed upon them. It's in those moments, where I'm reminded about the extraordinary power of art as a space for connection and imagination and dignity. By bringing all these children together, there is really a strong and powerful connection that happens. And then afterwards, I start to realize how this session is becoming a space to express and to claim agency. I never claimed that I'm trying to offer a therapy for these kids, but in these 2 hours that I spend with these kids, I'm sure they feel better, and I can see in their eyes the amount of joy, especially when I pack my things and I'm about to leave. They follow me and they ask me if I'm coming again, if I'm coming tomorrow. So, and I wish I can come again and I can spend more days with these kids. But for me, this project is, a mobile project that needs to reach more kids.
So many things to unpack there about what the children themselves are producing in these sessions, in these workshops, is that you're going to produce a book, right? An accordion style book where these children's drawings are the raw material, and you yourself are going to be working on the final scrolls. And you're also inviting other artists who have lived through war and displacement to participate in the project. How is this challenging you today as a professional artist to shape a work that has been started by children of displacement?
Well, for sure, this is a very challenging process. I think it requires me or other artists to let go of the traditional role of the artist as the sole author or owner of the work itself. So by beginning the books with the children's work that is shaped by their memories and fears, experiences, and of course dreams, this is what is probably the most challenging thing. We try to create a framework which these voices can continue to resonate with the artist's work. So I wanted to find a balance and how we can transform these drawings and the artist's intervention without losing the essence of the gesture itself, So I'm inviting artists that went through similar experiences, not necessarily in their childhood, but in their life. The whole project this time is about collective effort, is about connection, is about bringing Lebanese people together. And here again, the children, they become collaborators rather than participants. We're not making art about them, we're making art with them.
I keep going back to this dream of the tree, a true analogy for what you're doing with your work and the book itself.
Exactly. I would say the majority of kids, they are genuine artists, like every time I look to the children's drawing, I see amazing artists behind each color and each gesture and each mark. So to start the work with children's work would somehow shift the way we think about art. Not as a final product only that could interest collectors and galleries, but to also connect with the inner child in us.
It's a practice. It's not, like you said, it's not a product, but it's a practice. There's a constant state of evolution when you are practicing art.
Exactly.
I think Opus One, we operate programs that are built on the same premise that creative practice, leaning into that word of practice, that product, is central to creating systemic, sustainable change. For people out there listening who are new to this idea of art as infrastructure, art as a practice for collective healing and for growth, I think they want to know what art is actually doing and why what you're doing now in Lebanon is worth investing in.
Well, there's so many stories. From the first school I visited, I always mentioned this little boy who was really so enthusiastic, and he was like a great listener. And then at the end of the session, he came to me and he said, "Can I call you?" Because in Lebanon we use the word "ammo," which is uncle. If we want to speak with an adult, this is how children use this word. So he said, "Can I call you something other than ammo?" So I said, "What do you want to call me?" He said, "Can I call you dad?" And this was a very touching moment. Of course, I asked him about his father. He's still alive, but he didn't see him since the beginning of the war. This moment also made me feel very responsible. These children, they need attention. They need someone to hear them. They need the right and the safe space to express. There was a boy who lost the ability to speak when their house in the south was completely destroyed. While they were there was a strike that hit the house, and from that moment he wasn't able to speak. So when I knew his story, of course I gave him more attention because he's in a different situation than other kids. And trust me, Christopher, what happened after 2 hours was really like a miracle. I gave him the microphone to say what he did do, and which is something I usually do after every session. So these kids can feel some sort of confidence. So they tell the other children what they did and what they do. So I asked this kid if he would like to say what he do. And for the first time, he couldn't say anything. Then I asked him another time. And then the third time, he said one word. He said heart. And for me, this was an incredible moment, to see a kid after 2 hours being able to challenge himself and to come up and to say a word that somehow for me represent the whole initiative. A heart. After that day, I managed gladly to secure a speech therapist who accepted to volunteer for this kid. He's done 3 sessions so far, and he's progressing, and this is amazing. I'm not someone who was trained with therapy or art therapy or how to deal with these kids. But I think because I believe in what I'm doing, and this is what is interesting to me, that really, if you believe that you are able to change through listening, through connection, human connection, miracles can happen. It's not a joke, it's something that I've witnessed and I felt and I've seen. And I became more convinced about the power of human connection. I wouldn't say a power of art. The art is a tool, and if you use it in the right way to connect on a spiritual, on emotional level, you definitely can succeed in what you want to accomplish.
Just hearing that a child who was nonverbal had the courage to even say one word, and that word to be heart, it makes you really understand why you started to do this.
Of course.
This is quite extraordinary. So with what you've lived as an artist, as a person, and as even a healing practitioner, has your perception around where art lives in the world or how it lives in the world changed?
I don't believe that art should belong exclusively to museums and galleries, collections, or institutions. And for sure, those spaces are important, but they are only part of the story. Perhaps the thread connecting all these different experiences, and my belief that art is ultimately about human connection, as I said, and to create spaces where we can reflect on our personal stories, but also recognizing ourselves in the stories of others. So it allows us to confront our own tragedies, traumas, fears, while discovering shared experiences that connect us across different backgrounds and realities. So whether a work is hanging in a museum or collection or being created collectively on a paper roll, the value or its value lies in its ability to move people and to create dialogue and deepen our understanding of ourselves and others. So for me, art lives wherever human beings are trying to make sense of the world around them.
That's beautiful. Abed, I want to thank you, not just for this conversation, but for who you are and what your practice represents. At the end of the day, you truly remind us that art is there when there is no hope, because it is how hope gets rebuilt.
Thank you, Christopher, for such a thoughtful conversation. It was really a pleasure speaking with someone who shares a genuine belief in this transformative role of art.
To everyone, go and check him out. So on Instagram, at Abed Al Kadiri, right? And
Right.
your website as well. Do go support in any way that you can. I'm sure you're actively looking for partners as you're growing out the capacity to serve all these amazing children. For other inspiring conversations like this one, or to learn more about our work at Opus One, visit our website at www.opusonefoundation.org and follow us across our social media at Opus One Foundation. You can also find the latest episodes of The Art of Impact on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Christopher Kortsidis. This is The Art of Impact. Thank you for listening.